Morning. I'm Michele Borba. I'm saying good morning because I'm talking to you from California, but I'm delighted to be able to be here. I'm a huge Roots of Empathy fan. In fact, I'm Mary Gordon's cheerleader. She just doesn't realize it. I've been recognizing Roots of Empathy for almost 21 years, and I am a huge advocate. But I'm here talking to you about something else, and that is the crisis that we're now facing with our youth and what we as a group of caring people everywhere in the world can do to help our children. We realized before this pandemic that we had a problem. In fact, I was concerned to the point where I've never been this concerned about our kids in terms of the saddest generation, the most risk averse, the most anxious, and also the most likely to be depressed. And then came the pandemic. Prior to this pandemic, American kids, 1 in 5 was going to suffer from a mental health disorder, 1 in 5. And then came the pandemic. We're now looking at the latest studies that tell us, even from the CDC, to watch out because the next wave of the next crisis is going to be a youth mental health crisis. Are we ready? Are we prepared? What I want to do is share with you what I think we can do, what we must do, and we must reset our parenting and education because we've got to follow the science and we've got to realize it's not another program. It's hearts, minds, and intentional efforts of all of us following the science that can make and maximize the biggest difference on what's happening with our kids. It's all going to start with empathy, but you may want to just take one piece of paper just to write down a couple of notes, and then at the end of me talking for 30 minutes, I'm here for any questions and answers you may have. Let me just share with you what I now know is going on with kids faced with trauma. Some kids are grief, other kids it's inconvenience. But the problem is we really don't know what's happened to many of our students in those homes. We do know from science that 3 things are going to help our kids or 3 things are going to hinder our kids. Those kids are most likely to bounce back and be resilient. First of all, have people in their lives. That's you. There is nothing more important than a caring person who refuses to give up on a child. Find those kids that you know that you are most concerned about and refuse to give up on them. Second of all, folks, it's a caring haven, a peaceful, safe place or a secure place, a place where a kid can walk in and feel like I can breathe. That's a school for many children. For many kids, it may be a home. For other kids, it may be just that courtyard. Other ones, it's going to be that classroom. But we've got to create a safe haven for kids because they're coming into us anxious, more anxious than they've ever been before. But the third thing that's fascinating that we now know the science clearly tells us is that if our children had pre-existing coping strategies or protective buffers prior to this pandemic or any kind of a tragedy or uncertainty, they're more likely to overcome. What I want to do is share with you those protective buffers because I'm an educational psychologist. I've studied this for over 40 years. I'm a late bloomer as to terms of it took 40 years to really figure out what will enhance kids' feelings of resilience. What can we implement in a school? I guarantee it's not one more dime. It's what we're already doing, but taking it up a notch. The book that I just finished writing is called Thrivers. I finished it a month before the pandemic, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's never been more important. But I identified 7 strengths. I want to share with you these strengths because I think it's our new little kind of our roadmap. If you're a parent or an educator, you can use in your classroom, your homes, your schools, or your village. I chose these 7, first of all, based on only the science. 40 years of science on resilience, phenomenal longitudinal studies, and I chose the ones also that are teachable, only teachable. Third is I wanted ones that are not locked into DNA. Forget that. I want the ones that we've got an impact over and can make a difference. Fourth is I wanted ones that can make a difference on mental health. That if we now know that we're suffering from a mental health across the world crisis, then what can we do to alleviate that? And finally, I know that many parents and teachers are concerned about, yeah, but I teach, and what about the classroom? The same 7 implement in a classroom, helping your kid become a peak performer, as well as outside the classroom in terms of resilience. So just a moment to go through them. And then I want to center in on 3 that I think are the core ones we better really focus in on because they're the core that have impacted our children over the last years anywhere in the world. It starts with confidence, really knowing who I am, what my strengths are, acceptance of those strengths. And as a result, you have purpose and meaning. What I found when I was interviewing 100 kids for Thrivers is the majority of children, despite extreme opportunities and well-loved children, said they felt empty. They were running on empty because they were pushed away from what those strengths are. So first is acknowledging our kids' strengths and keep buffering them. By the way, parents, hobbies make an enormous difference. Ordinary things, says science, can make an extraordinary difference on your kids' lives. A hobby that's healthy can actually impact that child so they can have a moment to decompress. The second one is empathy. Nothing new on that one. But we do know that empathy is the social glue that holds a home, a school, and a society together. It is unraveling, and we better rebuild it because it can be cultivated. Right now, we're looking at children. Before the pandemic said only about 4% felt lonely. The latest studies from the AMA says it's now bumped to 31%. Our kids are lonely and more anxious. They need empathy. They need relationships. Despite social distancing, we can do it. Third is self-control. Talk about a protective buffer. Wow, do our kids need coping skills? We've done a job before. Yeah, we had SEL programs, but every teen I interviewed said, but I need it so that it becomes a habit. I want it transferred and internalized, and don't give me a koosh ball. I want to be able to use it any place and any time. And if we don't, we've got more anxious kids. Again, latest studies are saying 4% of our kids felt severely anxious before the pandemic. It's now at 34%. Integrity. Kids who have it are more likely to handle the challenge because they have a strong moral code and they can bump over the mental challenge easier. That's you inside your kids' brains and heads and hearts. Curiosity. They've got to have an openness to people and life. But we do know that thrivers now, because they're made, not born, they also are more likely to be problem solvers. So when they're faced with a challenge, they can figure out a way through it. And then perseverance, that's the one we all want. Why aren't they there? Well, they've hit the COVID wall. Their motivation is low because their stress is high, their empathy is low, and so their perseverance is going to go. Let's look at some of those previous ones first, and then we can help our kids persevere. And finally, optimism. They've got to have a sense of hope, right? Because if they don't, there goes their permanent feelings of pessimism, and they begin to see the world as doom and gloom. 3, if you want to center in on them, let's look at empathy. Let's look at self-control. Let's look at optimism. All of them are teachable. Each chapter in Thrivers has dozens of proven strategies to use them. But I think the most important thing is we start with the 3 that matter most for our kids, and empathy. Empathy can be cultivated. But one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard a kid say in my life, I was viewing a Roots of Empathy program way far north in Fort McMurray about 21 years ago. The baby came in, Clara. Oh, Clara sat in the middle of the green rug. Oh, the kids were just mesmerized by being able to read the feelings off of how Clara was doing. And each month, Clara kept coming into that classroom. And I saw that it was making a difference on a kid's lives, all of them. I saw that emotional literacy was going up and inclusion in the class was just increasing and bullying was going down. So I asked the 3rd grader next to me, why does this work? And he said the most profound thing I've ever heard a 3rd grader say. He said, it works because empathy is a verb. I said, what does that mean? He goes, well, you don't learn it like a word of the month. It has to be real and meaningful. It's real and meaningful because we're learning it from Clara. And there's your first takeaway. We can teach empathy, but it better be real and meaningful. Our kids are going to see right through it. And the first step is, let's not start with the kids. Let's start with us. Let's start getting into the shoes of our students. What we've got to do is empathize with them. We've got to figure out what happened to them. What's going on in their lives? We've spent a year not knowing that, and it's hurtful to us. But how do we do it? There's a couple of simple ideas that I've seen some really brilliant use in the world do it. Warsaw, Indiana set up a Google monkey, $300, and they asked every high school student just to go on to it anonymously and let us know how stressed you are, or what are the things that you had happened to you during COVID that you wish your teachers knew. Then the superintendent printed it out. Your empathy went skyrocketing because you had no idea of the hurt and the pain that was going through with kids. You can flip it. You can also give each of your kids a 3x5 card, and you can ask one thing. What's one thing that happened to you that you'd like me to know that would help me? And ask each kid to just fill out their one thing, pass it on back to you. That'll open up your heart. We can't teach empathy to our kids unless we have the empathy ourselves. Third thing, well, the third thing is ask the parents. Can you just send an email to every parent saying, I care so much about your child. I need to know what happened to your child. Is there anything that you'd like me to know? Maybe grandma passed away. Maybe dad just lost his business. Maybe mom is so stressed. Maybe all of the above, but what's happened so we can step into the shoes of our own children. And then let's do one thing more. We know that empathy always breeds in a caring culture, right? It's not just the lesson. It's always the inclusive environment. And so maybe what you may want to do before, whenever your school doors open, now or September or whenever, wherever you're coming from, is take a walkthrough of the school and go, if I'm a student at this school, how would I feel? Step into the shoes of your kids. Would you feel welcomed? One of the most amazing things that Poway San Diego schools did, they went to Kmart and they bought welcome mats, a welcome mat to put outside each classroom door. Can you imagine the look on the kids' faces when they walked into the school and there's welcome mats? Or the middle school principal who realizes the kids were really hurting and very tense. So he's there every single day like you are, outside waiting for the bus or outside waiting for the kids. But he's standing there with a rescue dog because he knows some kids need that rescue dog before that he can meet them. Or there's just you that's mobilizing the children. Oh, let me give you this one. I love this one. Jeff Berger White. Oh my God, this man is an English teacher from Chicago, but he realizes that his kids were hurting. He teaches poetry, he teaches literature just like you do. But for 150 days, Jeff Berger White has been sending an email to every one of his students saying, I care about you, I'm concerned about you. But he's also sending a poem that he thinks would resonate with the kids. He says there's poems out there that can build up their empathy, that can help them, poems that can be very short. He says half the kids I know aren't going to read them, so he always tapes them. And just in case, it became a ritual or routines, because empathy needs a ritual and a routine. Because our kids, the uncertainty is mounting. But what began to happen was mind-boggling. When I asked Jeff Berger White, how's it working? He said, you can't believe it. I'm getting responses back from kids. It took them 30, 40, 50 days, but all of a sudden they're responding back. I said, can you share a couple of them? He said, sure. And here's one, get out the Kleenex. He said, I don't think of anything that's going on in our community or the world hit me, Mr. Berger White. Like when I read your poem this morning, all my friends have been crying and they've been crying and crying, but I never saw the need to. I thought everything was going to go back to normal eventually. But then I heard your poem and I don't know why, but I just broke into tears because no adult or teacher has ever been so consistent with normal life but you, with your poems. And I think that's someone epic. Everybody needs that. This type of normality is what I've been yearning for. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for providing it to my classmates at this time. What are you doing? What are you doing to reach out to your kids and let them know you're not giving up on them? What we do know about resilience research, the science is profound. But the most mind-bogglingly, most incredible way to help our kids rebound isn't anything about a program. It's never a worksheet. It certainly isn't a bulletin board. It's one of you who figures out who those kids are that you're really concerned about. Maybe you set up a Google Doc amongst yourselves as a staff, and you say, here's the few kids we worry about, but don't just put out the weaknesses. Here's the strengths I see them. Here's the things that they enjoy, or here's some things that seem to work, and pass that on to one another. You see the child for a certain time, that other teacher sees the child for a certain time. Parents, keep this going because our kids need you above all else. All of research says empathy. There's lots of ways we can teach it, but let's begin with us empathizing with our kids. That's the first one. Let's go to the second one, and that's self-control. What we do know about kids with this coping strategies is they've all told me, and I would strongly suggest the greatest way to figure out what kids need is just simply ask them. Are you doing focus groups with kids? They've got a pulse on their friends that's absolutely mind-boggling. You just get a focus group of kids, just like you used to do in the olden days when you sit around and you had lunch once a week with a certain group of kids. Don't just ask your student council. Ask kids to tell about how's it going with your friends? What do your friends need? And over again, each one of them said, we're so worried about our friends. The lifeline that they used to have at the counselors, they're not there. And sometimes when they try to reach the counselor, they can't. You want to know something? The single most important thing that I hope you get, I'm going to
pull over and give you to it, is a red card. Simple, laminated. Counselors, I know that you don't have enough of yous for the amount of kids that are there and wanting you, but kids say that they only have a certain amount of time to get to you, and sometimes it's that moment of crisis and they really need it. If you've got a red card on the other side of your door, all you need to do is have that kid take the pencil and the index card and say, I need you, slip it under the desk, under the door, and drop everything. That's the moment to reach that child. Find your availability. That's the first thing. Second thing is figure out who the kids are that are a little more irritable. There are some kids that are such on edge. We do know that domestic violence went up in some of those houses. We're not aware of it. In the state of California, we now have more homeless children, homeless kids that could wrap and fit into 5 Dodger stadiums. They're coming back to you. Let me tell you something, they're going to have a tough time focusing in on your dynamic lessons because their stress level is so high. Let's empathize with them. Maybe what you can do is get what I've seen a couple of teachers do, a private, quiet, dignified signal between you and the child. And it could be a pen that goes on the top of the desk, which just means I'm really irritable. I need to get to the mood room, or I need an excuse to get to the counselor, or I'm about ready to blow. But if that pencil or that pen comes out, that's a way for you to reach that child. Do you have something in place? Do you have something in place when that child is on edge? And that's what's happening to many of our kids. Their irritability levels are going up because they don't have that coping skill. And then do you have maybe a colleague right next door? 2 of the most brilliant teachers said, we've got it made. We got ourselves a white stapler. And I went, oh my gosh, what are you going to do with the white stapler? It's our strategy between us that if anytime a child comes into your room carrying a white stapler, it just means I need you to just take this kid for just 5 minutes, just please. I need to reboot my own self. I need to come up for air. He just needs some tender, loving care or just a new environment. She said, we haven't used it too often, but boy, do we have a pack and we're following through. Get a pack, support each other. Do you have a calm down corner in your classroom? Maybe it's nothing more than a couple of beanbag chairs with some wonderful books or a glitter jar or anything, but we need to put those in place. And how are you going to teach coping skills? Well, here's what's happening to empathy. Why it's in a nosedive, other than the fact our kids haven't been able to relate to one another and they've been social distance, and there goes their love life of being able to feel for one another. But the other thing that happens, as stress builds, which it is, you have to dial your empathy down in order to be in survival mode. And if you keep doing that, the outcome is burnout. You feeling a little burnout? So other things that you can do, maybe one learning partner. It could be Zoom or it could be in class. Yes, be protective of distancing, but that learning partner can be nothing more than check-in friend. How are you doing today? Don't start with the academics. How was last night? Did you sleep? Anything like that. And as you build it up, yes, you're teaching empathy, but you're also helping the child know that there's somebody there that you can reach out. That learning partner is also the one that if the kid looks more on edge, he can be the one to raise his hand and say he needs a friend. Let's look at what's the best way I've ever seen any school in the world help kids learn a coping strategy that didn't cost a dime. Visitation Middle School outside Oakland. They had very troubled kids who were so stressed, they were texting one another. Can you imagine? Texting one another as to which streets to avoid so you won't be hurt on your way to school. By the time they walked into your classroom, do you think they're going to be tuned into your dynamic lessons? No, their stress was too high. But thank heavens for the caring educator, the caring counselor who said, these kids need a coping skill. So what she did was to walk into each of your classrooms and volunteer to give a 5-minute lesson. She taught mindfulness, but she just taught deep, slow breathing. The fastest way I've learned it, I've worked on 18 Army bases. Navy SEALs, the most elite forces in the world, said, this is what you should be teaching your kid. It works for us. It gets us through some pretty adverse times and it doesn't cost a dime. The counselor said, slow, deep, close your eyes, take the breath from real low, like you're riding up an elevator or smelling a flower, all the way to the top. Hold it, count to 2, slowly let it out like you're blowing out a birthday candle. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? If the exhale is twice as long as the inhale, University of Madison, Wisconsin proved that's the fastest way to relax. You actually rewire your brain. But what the counselor said is one-time lesson isn't going to work. So she convinced the principal to shave off 1 minute out of each class so that every minute, every 5 minutes of every day, everybody in the entire school does slow, deep breathing. She also made a flash drive of the lesson, sent it home to the parents for the kids to teach the parents the lesson. She put this on the school website so that everybody was doing the same thing. For the teacher that said, I'm not sure that I can teach the lesson, then put this on your PowerPoint. What happened? Textbook magic. By the end of a certain amount of time, what they discovered in that particular school, suspensions went down, attendance went over the top, behavior problems went down, test scores went through the roof. And according to the Healthy California survey, those kids went to the top. What the impact is on self-control, we're already teaching it. What the kids said we're doing wrong is not making it a habit. So teach any one skill, but if you want to do SEL the right way, you teach it over and over and over and over until it becomes a habit, and that's how you maximize the impact. That's how you maximize the results. Third one, optimism, hope. Again, get into the shoes of your kids. What they've been seeing, pretty darn dismal. Every day, if you turn on the news, you're actually seeing a daily death count. You're seeing in the United States of America, racism. You're seeing live murders. You're seeing mass shootings. If you're a kid, how are you going to focus when all you're thinking about is, am I going to get through the day? And that's exactly what kids say. They are so worried. They're so anxious about their future. They're seeing dismal lengths. And here's the other thing that happens. After a while, pessimism begins to erode your optimism. Hope, I'm not saying raise Pollyannas. They got to have a reality base. But if you don't see the good, what begins to happen is you only see the bad. And pretty soon, there goes your empathy because you're seeing the dismal. There goes your stress, and there goes your sense of resilience. So what do? Well, here's the easiest things I've ever seen done. And I'm going to start with Long Island teens because, again, they had the answers. Long Island teens went to the superintendent and said, we are tired of seeing nothing but the doom and gloom stuff. Can you do us a favor? What, she said, put up a plasma TV right in the opening quad. So when you walk in, the first thing you see is this plasma TV. And what would be on it, she said? Well, stories that are good. So when you walk in, you're seeing the good news. That's exactly what the superintendent did, bless her. And now what you're seeing is a group of kids walking in. I've never seen a group of stressed out kids before the door. Open door, walk in. Everybody's up, hands around each other, now smiles because they're seeing images of goodness. You can do the same thing in your classroom. What you can then do on this one is just cut out the good news. There's always on the back page of the newspaper. Cut them out, blow them up. And every day it's a good news story that happened in the world because images elevate our children's hearts or they take them down. Elevate our children's hearts or they take them down. How about sharing the stories about the Ohio kids? Make sure they're good. Good news stories. Ohio siblings that were so concerned, empathy about the 78-year-old neighbor who's down the street all by herself. Mom, she must be so lonely. What can you do? I love that the parent said, what can you do? Always drive it from the kid. Well, maybe we could take our cellos and sit down in the middle of the porch and just give her a little social distance concert. Okay, said Mom. They dressed up, brought their cellos, did a little social distance concert. Mom, the woman sat there, tears in her eyes, crying. The kids cried because they were so happy that they made her happy. Mom videoed it, put it on Facebook, went viral. What happened? Kids all over the world were inspired. And now you're seeing ukulele concerts in Sacramento. You're seeing tuba concert in Brooklyn. You're seeing bagpipe concerts in Scotland because kids are inspired. What they need to do is see the good. Ask them what they need is the next thing. Ask them. I asked a 12th grade high school teacher, English, what are you reading to your kids? And she said, the most fascinating thing is I asked the kids, what kind of books do you want me to read? These are 12th grade, high achieving kids, and they all voted for one book. This is 20 questions, and I bet you'll never get it. Would you read us, swear, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day? She said, you got to be kidding. The kid said, no. Says, why do you need that? Because we're having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year. Our parents used to read this. We need to hear this kind of stuff. And so she's reading them, Alexander and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. The kids are smiling and they're choosing other books, but it's resonating with them because they know that that teacher is there with them. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the teacher connected with the child. We're looking for the parent connected with the kid. We're looking for not new programs. We're looking for people. We're looking for mobilizers, and there's dozens and dozens of simple little things that you can do. What I wanted to do today in just 30 minutes is share with you some of the best things I've seen, from the welcome mat in Poway to Friendstown, Texas. Can you imagine? The kids said it's the best place you could possibly grow up because they care so much about us. How do you know? Well, because we love football in Texas, but we couldn't play football for a year. But the teacher said, we still care about you, even though you can't be here. So every single Friday night, we're turning on the stadium lights. And no matter where you are in this entire town, just look for the lights and you know we're thinking about you. How can you get through that without just going, oh my gosh? And the kids were like, oh my gosh, they really care. I asked a child, just an incredible kid, what kind of a school do you need after going through a year like this? You've had such trouble. I know that you're really depressed. And she said, I know I am. But there's some simple little things that schools can do. They just need to make it a kind of a caring place. Like what? I said, well, there's this TV show my mom watches all the time. It's really lame. I don't like the TV show. I said, what's the show? She said, well, it takes place in Boston and it's in a bar. And there's these guys named Norm, Sam, and Rebecca. So do you like the show? No. I wait and listen for the song because it's what every kid needs. It's Cheers, a place where everybody knows your name and everybody's glad you came. That's the answer. You walk through your school and you go, is that what is resonating to your kids? When you prioritize something right now, folks, it's mental health, it's mental health, it's mental health. The rest will come. There's 7 strengths. Let's look at them one more time again, because they're all teachable. What you're going to look at in the book, Thrivers, is that each chapter is one of these strengths. But please, each one of these strengths is also made up of skills, 3 skills. So many of them you're already teaching. When I look at these now, I worry that so many of us go, oh, I don't have time for this. The best strategies are always woven in. They're always woven in, but they're always start with a haven of hope for kids. That's your school, that's your classroom, that's your home, or that's your village. I also want to just tell you that when I was writing Thrivers, I spent the year touring the world, and I saw some of the most mind-bogglingly caring places that really were hope havens for children, that really were building resilience. And I have to share one story with you because it was that sense of all of these combined, and it was in Beirut, outside Lebanon. Now, Lebanon has had a really horrific year, a mass bombing that went off that killed multiple people. But before that, they were in such financial strife that was horrific. I had flown there to tell the parents that I wanted to just do just a session for you. I'll talk to you about resilience because you're the most resilient, incredible people I've ever met. And I talked to the parents, and then they asked me, is there any places you'd like to go? And I said, yeah, I'd always like to see a refugee camp. Would you mind taking me to one? So a UN official brought me over to a refugee camp, and I got to tell you, it was horrific. There was a place where you walked the streets of it trying to find hope for kids. That's where they went to school. They would warn me, don't go down that street, Dr. Borba, because there's rabid dogs. Don't go down there where there's drug dealers. Don't watch out. Don't hit the wires. Those are electric wires. You get electrocuted. But I kept going, is there any hope for kids here? And they said, yeah, turn around and walk up those stairs. Just walk up. You'll need your flashlight, but walk up the stairs. I got up to the top of the stairs, and I was outside this little, like a door. They said, go ahead, walk across. I walked across, walked in, and literally started to cry because it was hope. It was one man, one of you who had empathy, who realized kids needed hope. And what he'd created was a chess club. There was nothing more than plastic chess sets. There was little teeny tables and one man. And it was 3 o'clock. The school bell had rung, and I'm watching kids walk in to that club. They were running into that club. I watched their faces outside the club, and they looked so stressed. All they did was pass over the top. The stress went. Every kid said, well, I asked them, why do you like this place? This is the place we can breathe. This is the place where I've learned that I'm good at something. This is the place that gives me hope. What that man was creating was a Cheers kind of a place. And that's what it's all about us to do. Thrivers are made, not born. I think we're in an unprecedented moment in time when we need to press reset. There's science that's on our side. It doesn't need to be hard. It can be easy. All we need is our heart and our mind and intentionality together, folks. We got this. For the kids' sake, we have got to do this. Thank you. It's been an honor. My website's michelleborba.com. Everything's in Thrivers, but most importantly, think about one thing, someplace that you can do. Take a moment and think, if I'm walking into my school, my classroom, my home, is it a Cheers kind of a place? Because that's what every kid said they're needing above all. The rest will come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borba, for that incredibly thoughtful and engaging presentation on how we can support kids in today's world. We've had some questions come in through the chat that I'd like to share with you if you don't mind. So I'll start with the first one. It says, how do you manage kids who are too anxious to attend school, either in person or online? Anxiety levels are so high that some kids are unable to attend at all. They are unable to cope with the stress of school and likely the ongoing lockdown here in Toronto.
Here you go on number 2, on a couple of things on this one. The first thing is, I want you to please, all of you, know something about mental health. And I think we need to use what I call the 2 index. It's so simple because all of us go, how do I know? And when do I worry? And when do I know is too much? And when do I need to get help? I want you to watch the kid very closely. And anytime you're noticing that the child is too different from his normal, it's lasting too long, you have too many red flags going up, saying this is not right, and it's spilling over into too many areas, the first thing is realize this child needs professional help. Get that help because there is some possibilities. The second thing we know about kids who are very, very anxious, and anxiety is going up, and every kid says that their anxiety is going up. They need coping skills, but we also need to start chunking their fear. So for instance, for a child who's so concerned about how do I go from here, the home, to there, the school, don't do it overnight. It's like when a child is scared to death of the swimming pool and water, you don't throw him in the deep end. Instead, you chunk the fear. You put him toe in the first day and his foot in the next day, and slowly you build up his ability to be able to handle it. Many of the kids are telling me that the reason they are so anxious is for safety levels. They're concerned about death. They've seen a daily death count, or they've had somebody near and dear die, and now they're worried that they're going to get it. So what do you do as a parent? First thing, you go online, you look at the CDC, Toronto, you look at what your guidelines are, you then go to the school website and you start showing them in a calm voice. Looks like they really are providing the safety standards you need. Your kids are mirroring your stress. The key is you've got to be cool yourself. The second thing is start chunking it so that let's open up the window today. Looks like you're okay. Let's open up the door. Oh, looks like you're okay. Let's open up, let's walk to 1 foot out, the next foot out, the next foot out. Find one friend who can now be a buddy and start walking. What you're trying to do is help this kid find safety and security after a doom and gloom, and it does not happen overnight. Those are just a few. That anxiety needs to be chunked, but the single most important thing is you need to be calm. Be calm because your kids are mirroring and catching our fears. I know that because I've worked in a lot of war zones when parents have come up to me and asking, can kids catch fears? Yes, they can. They are catching ours. Be careful.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question says, do you attribute the current youth mental health epidemic to the use of technology and devices and the lack of time and solitude? When there's a dull second, kids are turning to their phones. Our brains are not designed for continuous input from the brains of others. iGen is suffering in ways we've never witnessed in our known history.
Yes, I think that we need to blame the technology, but I don't think that that is the only thing. When I was writing Thrivers, I spent 4 years researching why do we have such a mental health crisis. And the fascinating thing is that the first thing we discovered in the United States is the biggest mental health crisis was with upper middle class kids. When I started to interview 100 of them one-on-one for an hour each, the number one thing they told me is that yes, technology was contributing a bit to it, because they couldn't read each other as well as they could before. They were having problems relating to one another. There goes empathy. So yes, technology does play a part. But the second thing that kids said is expectations were so huge that they were so worried that they were going to be disappointments to their parents, that it had risen to such a point that they were so concerned. The third thing was I started looking and tracking incoming college freshmen. What did Ivy League counselors say from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, UCLA? The first thing they said is that they were now noticing it was the loneliest, this is prior to the pandemic, the loneliest breed they've ever seen. Many of the kids didn't want roommates. That was prior to the pandemic because Sandbox had been removed from their lives. Yes, they were using technology, but they also didn't have play dates, nor did they have hobbies or any of the ordinary things that would just help them decompress. All of the counselors at the Ivy League colleges also said they were running out of counselor resources because the kids couldn't cope. The number one time that kids are now likely to drop out of school is into freshman year, first semester of college. I've dealt with many college counselors who now say, you know what, you primed your kids to get here. Now we need to figure out how to keep them here. And the big thing is they don't learn coping skills. Another big factor was helicoptering. And that was rescuing our kids. So we've solved all their problems for them. And if you look at the 7 traits, many of those 7 traits aren't there, and they're not technology problems. When you look at confidence, that's dismal, and that's not upping the resilience because kids don't have how to decompress and enjoy their own company. Yes, they're using technology, but they don't have anything to do in their place. Empathy, their relationships are going, but they also don't have play dates enough, and parents aren't doing that. One-on-one activities and pose of what I can do. I want you to look a little more at the 7 traits, because the fascinating thing is I took hours of research to try to figure out why each of those 7 traits, which restores resilience, is going down. And technology wasn't the only blame for it. So I think we need to be a lot more thoughtful about it. In the meantime, we need to, as a group, put some deadlines on technology, because we also realized that that was our lifeline, our kids' lifeline to each other. And now what's happened is they've become addicted, even more so across every technological. In fact, last week I did Ireland. 2 weeks ago, I did Hong Kong, then the Philippines. There is not a country that hasn't told me that they're not worried about their kids' technological use. So it's time for us to rebuild the boundaries.
Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is about the 7 traits, and it says, how important is it that kids see those 7 essential traits in their parents as well? We as parents can push those traits until we're blue in the face, but if we don't model them ourselves, are we giving a mixed message?
That's exactly it. That would be the introduction to Thrivers, is that the best way to teach any trait, any skill, is not the worksheet, it's by modeling it. So what I always encourage parents to do is start by looking at, in fact, there's a core asset survey that I want you to take to look at what your kids' strengths and weaknesses are, their learning styles and all of those strengths. But in addition, what I want you to do is look to see which one of you modeling. Because what we do know is that the 3 best ways to teach any of these are example, 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 but also expecting it and the experiences. Also across the board, I think as educators, we do a heck of a job of teaching empathy, but now what we realize is that we've got to model it ourselves or it's going to have a mixed message. So they're doing some really fascinating new things in educational spectrums across the country and the world of how to teach empathy to teachers. So they'll be more likely to teach it to kids, and how to develop an empathy mindset in ourselves. I love your question, and you're right on the mark.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question is, how do you nurture the mental health of Black and Indigenous students when education systems that are meant to care for them may not, and many don't feel a sense of belonging?
I am with you 1,000 percentage points. I've spoken to many of, in fact, I've worked in your in many of your First Nations across the countries in the world, and it's horrific. What we've got to do is be a heck of a lot more inclusive, and we're not. And so when we say we're going to start teaching empathy, we better be how empathetic are we? How much are we in touch with whoever our students are? How do we know what's happening in their world? And are we tuned into their culture and how they're being raised? Have we taken a moment to step into their world? Let me just flip this a minute. And that is way far north in New York. You may not realize it. There is heavy, heavy spectrums of poverty. Now, what they realized is their teachers weren't tuned into the poverty levels of how, when the kids finally arrived at their school, how bad it was. And how they weren't in touch in terms of empathy. So what they did is they started some extraordinarily new, fascinating ways to help the teachers understand poverty by doing role-playing scenarios with any new teachers on how to step into this is what the kitchen looks like, this is what the food looks like. Here's what their daily, all of a child who's walking home from your school, here's how he's doing his homework at night. All of a sudden it stretched the teachers to a whole new octane level where they now could empathize with the kids. We need to be a lot craftier, and we need to say, do we know who we're teaching? Are we stepping into those kids' shoes? And if not, well, how can we do a far better job? Because the kids are reading a different message, and it's not doing any justice to the child. I love that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So the next question is, I struggle with how much I should protect my child and how much I should sit back. No parents want to see their child get teased, hurt, or suffer loss, but I know they need to develop resilience as well. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the other things of the 7 traits that I saw, I was trying to look at types of parenting styles that increase resilience and types of parenting styles that reduce it. And one of the things we do know is that bubble wrapping and coddling and rescuing takes the resilience down. Why? Because actually you need to be exposed to a little bit of stress in order to realize I can get through it. If you haven't been exposed to a little bit of adversity, I'm not talking put the doom and gloom on the kid, but if you haven't had any kind of reckoning with stress or adversity, you're going to have a problem with a child who's going to be facing with a very uncertain world who's not being prepared. Thus, so what do, parent? Number one is already congratulate yourself because you've admitted that you've been helicoptering. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Number 2 is what you then do is say, make a new rule. Your new rule from this moment on is never do for your kid what your kid can do for yourself. Number 3, you start taking the moment that when every time the child comes home crying or sobbing or being upset, have him sit down, and step number 5 of those strengths is called curiosity. You teach creative problem solving. And the first step of that is, what's the problem? Ask the child to admit the problem. Don't tell him the answer. Instead, let's brainstorm what else you can do instead. What's one idea? What's another idea? You can give a couple of ideas, but keep going so that the kid begins to realize the solutions are in here. And if you keep giving the solutions to your child, he'll never be able to realize I got it on my own. Thrivers are kids who have agency. That's the commonality. They've developed a strong sense of I got this, not mommy's going to do it for me or teacher's going to solve it for me. Agency evolves. Parenting is a journey. None of these lessons are going to happen overnight. But if you do them slowly along the way, you teach the skills in thrivers one by one, and maybe you hit immediately, go to number 5. What you'll then do is help your child be able to learn how to live without you. And that's what our kids need. To be able to thrive, you've got to be able to help that sense of agency, and you've got to be exposed and learn these skills so you can do them on your own.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, this is the last question that we have. And it says, I read your book, Dr. Borba, bravo. You gave the most interesting story about how your own dad embodied everything you're talking about. Can you share it with us?
Oh yeah. Thank you for reading the book, but thank you. My dad was extraordinary. I need to tell you that I'm an only child. I was born in Northern California. My dad was the superintendent. My mom was the kindergarten teacher. Thus, I became an educator. I married an educator. My life is teaching. But I didn't realize the things that happened to my dad when he was young, because my dad was older. He married my mom when he was older, and my grandparents had passed away when I never met my grandparents. I came home from college, University of California, Davis. There's a sideline I have to tell you about why. And I came home and my dad was so upset that day. He was actually kind of going back and forth, and he was usually so calm, but he was holding this magazine, a Newsweek, in his hand, and he was livid. And I said, "What's the matter, Dad?" And he said, "You see this, don't buy into it." And it was a cover issue of babies. And it said basically that the first 3 years of life make or break a child. He said, "If this was true, Michele, I'd be dead today. Don't buy into this stuff. You can help kids become resilient." Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. And slowly he sat down and began to tell me that his parents were immigrants, like many. He'd come to the United States, uneducated, extremely poor. My grandfather passed away when my dad was 2. My grandmother is now destitute. The only way that she can help her children is to put them into an orphanage. So my dad at age 2 now lives in an orphanage. What happens to my dad? He said, "I thrived because of people." He said, "It was the nuns in the orphanage who had such empathy, Michele. That's the first thing I was able to attach." He said, "The neighbor next door, when I finally was released from the orphanage, always knew that I needed extra money and made sure that I had extra time to be able to rake back and forth and leave. So he gave me an extra, like a few cents. The librarian, she always snuck extra books for me to read. So I had something to be able to have a hobby. The school teacher, she knew that I liked to read, would teach me how to read. Every teacher, every person, they all became this haven for me." He said, "Michele, you have got to realize that people make a major difference on a kid's life. Resilient kids are made." I went back, changed my major, became a psychology major. And Emmy Werner, who was the gold mine for thrivers, was doing at the University of California the best research ever, a 40-year study on a group of children who were incredibly, same as my dad, growing up in poverty, adversity, unbelievableness. She studied them for 40 years and discovered, she was shocked, 1/3 of them were bouncing back despite it all. Why? Same thing we talked about at the beginning. Protective buffers. That's what my dad was learning. All those people were giving him buffers. The second thing was people, caring people like you who refuse to give up on them. And a haven. Someplace that was a haven for those kids, like the school or the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club, someplace, or the chess club where the kids could walk in and breathe. So that was my dad. Thank you so much for that question. But that's how I changed my whole outlook on life, was that one article and my dad saying, "Don't buy into it. Resilient kids are made."
Thank you. That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Michele Borba for her very thoughtful and insightful presentation, and to all of you for joining the cafe. I'll put the picture of her book back up on the screen so you can see it. And thank you. Thank you for your presentation. We really, really appreciate it.
Take care of yourself, guys. Please take care of yourself. Can I have time for one more story? Oh, thank you. Because
Absolutely, yes.
I interviewed so many incredible people while I was writing Thrivers, but this one woman calls me. She's about 85 years old. She's a journalist and she lived in Britain. She's interviewing me on resilience. And I went, "Get out. You lived in London during the Blitz. I should be interviewing you. How did you survive a Blitz in London?" She says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Come on, every night there's air raid sirens, there's bombings, there's, jets going over. Your whole town, your city was desecrated. How did you live through that?" She said, "I don't remember any of that except the air raid sirens." I went, "Why?" She says, "Because the minute the air raid sirens came off, my grandparents would pull the black shade, so we had blackout, and then we'd start to sing Ring Around the Rosie. All I remember is singing Ring Around the Rosie and playing games with my grandparents." I went, "Oh my God, that's it. That's calmness that's mirrored through." Anna Freud did a study in London that just mirrored that exact one. Why did some kids make it in London where other kids didn't? The single most important one is any war, any adversity, any poverty is calm people, such as yourself, who refuse to give up on a kid, meaning take care of yourself so you can take care of the kids. They need you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.